Hey everybody, welcome back to 2022 on The Thoughtful Bro. I am so happy to be here. Happy New Year. We are, of course, live streaming, as always, on a mighty blaze on Facebook and YouTube. And we're also now, starting in 22, live streaming on Twitter. Why? Because the Blaze never sleeps. Always innovating, always something new. So look, I'm going to talk for a second here to get us started, but I am so excited to have Xochitl Gonzalez on the show. Her book is just going to the moon and beyond. It is like the hottest book out there right now. And I just feel lucky that I booked you like 8 months ago, because I don't think I would have been able to like get to you now. You're like so big now. So anyway, but let me just give a few words. My daughter, it's funny, my daughter said to me the other day, she like watched one of my shows. She's like, Daddy, you talk too much at the beginning of the show. But but anyway, I'm gonna talk for a few minutes, just introduce everybody to the show and to Xochitl, and then we'll get going. So as you know, Tuesday at 2, Thoughtful Bro. We're always here talking about what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick, and we're hosted on A Mighty Blaze. If you don't know about A Mighty Blaze, it's an all-volunteer initiative, which is the same age as COVID, because I and some friends of mine, like New York Times bestselling author Jenna Blum and Caroline Leavitt, decided to start A Mighty Blaze because everybody's book tours got canceled. So now we have A Mighty Blaze, which is a place where readers can connect with writers virtually during COVID and then beyond COVID too. You can find all of our interviews on the Mighty Blaze Facebook page, our YouTube pages. You can also go to amightyblaze.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter, which will arrive fresh in your inbox every Sunday night and just tell you what shows are coming up this week. I'm not the only host on A Mighty Blaze. We have a lot of other shows, which you can find out about again on amightyblaze.com. All of this content is free. If you want to show your love for us, just like us on the socials, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. That's the best way to help us out. And then just tune in and watch. And a few more notes about that. We're actually running our first survey for A Mighty Blaze, to see our kind of audience viewer survey, just to see what you guys think we can improve and like areas that we're not covering, genres we're not covering, things like that. My producer is going to pop a link to that survey into the chat. It takes like 5 minutes to fill it out. It would be a big help if you did. So please fill out our Mighty Blaze annual survey. What else did I want to tell you guys? Yeah, like I said, all this content is free. But if you are in the mood to spend money, I have an idea for you of a way you could spend that money. It's right here on fantastic, fresh, amazing, beautiful, white hot books by debut authors. OLGA Dies Dreaming by Xochitl Gonzalez. That is where you need to spend your money. I've been getting so much. My socials have just been sort of lighting up with people saying like, I'm reading that book. I'm reading that book. I feel like we're sort of in a Xochitl Gonzalez moment here, and it's amazing. All right, just a few more thoughts, and then we're going to introduce Xochitl. In fact, just one more thought. Next week, it's a tease, I'm going to have on Harley Rustad to talk about his work of nonfiction. It's called Lost in the Valley of Death, a story of obsession and danger in the Himalayas. So this is a book, it's sort of like, it's been drawing comps to John Krakauer's Into the Wild. It's about the disappearance of an American backpacker who goes to this super remote part of India to go hiking and get off the grid. And it's about what happened to him. So that is next week on The Thoughtful Bro. That is all for the preamble. Now let's get into our guest. Xochitl Gonzalez has an MFA from the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, where she was an Iowa Arts Fellow and the recipient of the Michener Copernicus Prize in Fiction. What a name for a prize. I wish one day I could win that award. That sounds awesome. She was the winner of the 2019 Disquiet Literary Prize, and her work has been published in Bustle, Vogue, and The Cut. Her debut novel, once again, OLGA Dies Dreaming, has been getting rave reviews like every day on Xochitl's Twitter. It's like something new pops up. The View, the Washington Post, AP, New York Times. Everybody's talking about this book. It's sort of a rom-com about a wedding planner and aspiring TV show star, but it's also goes deep into kind of, the main character's Puerto Rican heritage and the kind of political history of Puerto Rico. It's also a love letter to Xochitl's hometown of Brooklyn. It's on just about every single most anticipated book of the year list. The book reporter said, I love this, said, OLGA Dies Dreaming is a whip-smart, utterly fresh take on familial strife, race relations, and what it means to be successful in America. It's an awesome book. And Xochitl, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to see you. It's so cool. We saw each other like in 2019, I think. Yeah. It's wild.
It's wild. It's wild. And I sort of like wanted to start the interview there because, so Xochitl and I both went to Brown. We graduated the same year. We were at a reunion in 2019. And it was, oh God, those were like beautiful days. I remember seeing you. We had no masks on. It was pre-COVID. It was just this beautiful spring evening under this tent. But yeah, I mean, so Xochitl, I want to, normally when I talk to authors, the part about kind of how you became an author, especially for debut authors, sort of comes at the end of the interview. But I think I want to start there with you because I think your story is actually really, really, really interesting. I think people will really dig it. So I know that you have said that the idea that you would become a writer, you were 40 years old, standing in a Neiman Marcus, and you said to your friend,
"You said Neiman Marcus last call. It was sadder than a Neiman Marcus. It was like picking through discounted Vince t-shirts or something. I don't know." Yeah.
Okay, as one does, and so you're sitting there, kind of thinking about your future, and you say to this good friend of yours, you're like, "I think I'm going to be a writer," and your friend says, "That's obviously what you should be," or something to that effect, like that's your destiny. But just tell us about that. So you'd never tried writing? You never even thought about it, and then it just hit you like a ton of bricks?
I definitely never thought about it as a career. I didn't think I knew my college roommate was Celeste Perry, and she's now an executive at Bloomberg News, but she was a big creative writer. And I think I got very intimidated. She won the 17 magazine fiction writing contest, which was such a thing when we were teenagers that I sort of was I can't compete with that. And then, and I met people that got to Brown that were already very seasoned writers, which is interesting because now on the other side of it, I read some of their that type of student's application to get to Iowa, and I see the difference in what the time does. But I was super intimidated by it, and I don't think. And then even after the fact, it's almost everybody went into journalism of some sort. Karen did music journalism, Celeste went into journalism, and I had a lot of debt. And my grandparents had raised me, and I think I described it this way to somebody. I had a very modest childhood, and it was in my ambitions and and not even that, so modest that nobody knew what Brown was, and so they really did not care that I was going. They were like, "This just seems expensive. You sound like a dummy." It was doing this. You could go to Brooklyn College for free. So that was very much the mindset, and I just wanted to finish college and get a decent job and do something kind of fun and creative, and so I didn't think about it. And then when I had my business, my wedding planning business, it was sort of the dawn of blogging, and I was like, "Oh, I could blog about being a wedding planner." And I was engaged at the time, I think. So I think I was kind of writing about being engaged and getting married. And then eventually it sort of became an advice column for wedding vendors, because you're dealing with so many insane people all the time. But I had that blog for a really long time, and it was fun, but then limiting, you know what I mean? And so I was I'm bored with this content, and then I stopped writing completely. I sort of I thought maybe I started a Medium page that I kind of gave up on. And then I don't know, a friend of mine died at 38.
Oh my God.
At work, literally at work. She had a bad performance review and had a panic attack and then had a heart attack. And then she died. And we watched her in a coma for 2 weeks before she actually died. And then maybe a year and a half after that, I was about to turn 40 and my grandmother died. And she was the last of my grandparents that raised me. And it was just sort of this strange, magical thinking time to use Joan Didion's language, is where you were, I don't know, I always felt the two things happened right together. In my memory, they happened right when, but it was this time of just reassessment and what's happening. And I just sort of had this thought that I wanted to do it. And Elena, it was my childhood best friend. We met in the library, and we met when we were 11 years old, and she works in publishing, and and I, and she was absolutely, this is what you're meant to do. And she's been my primary reader. I thank her in my acknowledgments. She's read this Olga in 20-page increments. Oh, by the way, I quoted Joan Didion. I'm not a giant Joan Didion reader, but I did read that one book. I read that book when my grandfather died. Somebody gave it to me, and it did stick with me. But And so I would just say, like, I just sort of felt this nagging thing, like, where it's like, you're definitely not getting younger. Like, death was very much like hovering, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And also, maybe in a weird way, like, my grandparents, because they were so, like, they were the type of people, like, it's like, that's crazy, you're going to start a business. Like, like anything other than like teaching or law school or blah, blah, blah was crazy. And maybe it was sort of like nobody was left to question me. And I sort of, in the one way I could have felt lost, but instead I decided to feel a little liberated. And so I just decided to take it that route. And
Yeah.
so I went to Breadloaf. Like, I wrote a personal essay and I applied nonfiction to Breadloaf. And that was an amazing experience. I say it was like in that Blind Melon video when the girl finds the bees and the girl in the bee costume finds the bees. Like, I felt like I found all my bees, like,
Totally.
so great. And I got so much better. And I just did not, it was like a crash course in thinking like a writer and reading like a writer. And I got so much better that I was like, I started from people I met there. I started this teeny tiny little writing group. It was like three of us, and one of them, Clavis Natera, she has a book coming out this year too. So that, and she's also we were all sort of 40-year-old writers. Like, it was great. And I decided, you know what, my two other compatriots in my little group had kids and were married. And I was like, you don't have that. I was like, so that could, again, it was sort of like, I could either see this as a limitation or I could see it as liberating. And I was like liberating. So I applied to all these grad programs. I realized I talked too fast. It's like the New Yorker in me. I applied to all these grad programs, and at the last minute, they told me, and by the way, I really had not written a ton. I just want to say, I think I sent them, I written a really beautiful essay that was what won the Disquiet Prize. And then I wrote a short story that I still haven't published. And that was what I sent in to all my graduate school applications. And on a lark, they were like, you should apply to Iowa. And I was like, great, because it felt riskless because nobody gets in. Do you know what I mean? Like, it felt super riskless. So, and then I had the idea for Olga in my mind. I was like, because I was raised by people like that, like they were Great Depression people, I was like, well, if you're going to go to graduate school, you're going to walk out with a novel, and so I'd been sort of ruminating on what that might be. I had the idea for Olga in its loosest form, honest to God, the same day that Sam Chang called to tell me I got into the workshop. So and it was such a wild, in terms of like rebirths, like it was a wild experience because I went to Brown against all of this pleading and plotting. I really had wanted to be there, but I borrowed so much money to get there. I had like a tiny scholarship, like blah, blah, blah. And the entire time, I think I made myself feel apologetic about being there. And the great part about this, it was like exactly the opposite experience. It was like everything was free. They were paying me to like I had like a graduate stipend, and I was like, I'm not, I read about people having like Iowa imposter syndrome, and I was like, we wasted one experience doing that. Like, let's not do that again. Like, I never didn't feel like I didn't belong there. And so I showed up with 200 pages of Olga, and Sam Chang was running a novel writing workshop, and I was like, great, like perfect, like talk about perfect. Totally. She was, and Kevin Brockmeyer was doing a sci-fi and fantasy class, which actually plays into how the book ends, because I took that class again on a lark, and that I would never have thought of like a time jump to resolve this book.
The ending is so interesting of the book. That's interesting that you say that, because I did think the ending was so interesting in that way.
Totally, had I not taken that sci-fi fantasy class, and I showed up and everybody had been like steeped in sci-fi and fantasy, and I was like, I'm just here because I'm sci curious. Like it was like I don't know anything about sci-fi or fantasy. I'm sci curious. No, I was totally sci curious. But and then when we got there again, like the age thing, it's so great sometimes because they're like, well, who wants to go first? Because it's a novel workshop. You're putting up at least 100 pages at a time, and nobody wants to go first. Except I was like, well, what did I come? I moved to Iowa. Like, yeah, I'll go first. Like, I'm here for you to read my freaking book. I'm trying to not curse. I'm here for you to read my book. Like, yeah, I'll go. Yeah. I went first. It was great because then I got feedback, and then I spent the rest of the time. I was in Iowa. I had nothing else to do, and I was so much older than my classmates. I made some friends, but like mainly I just worked on the book. They were my friend. They were my friends. They were my friends.
All right, wait. I want to ask you though, before two things I want to ask you. So first, I had a question from the audience that usually I hold these for the end, but this is so relevant. We're just going to pop it up here from Gabby. What do you think would have happened if you had committed yourself to writing from the beginning?
there's one version where my side curious mind just went on. There's one version where I would, have like turned out like as, I don't know, Danielle Steele levels of work, right? And maybe, but I think there's another version where I don't think my work would have been as interesting, if that makes any sense. Like, I think that I had so many, the interim years, I think that the work might have at some point become craft-wise as good, but I just don't know that the story, I think what's getting lost in some of this MFA obsession like, I understand it's a streamlining process, whatever. I'm happy that I did it, because coming in at this age, it's hard to like break into something. But the problem with the MFA obsession and how like it's geared towards younger people is that I think that we get obsessed with craft and not as interested enough in story and the fiction of it, the art of it all. And so, I mean, to go back to Gabby's question, like, I think what would have happened is I probably would have made more. I'd have a lot of more books, but I don't know that they would be as rich of experience, because I would have lived a lot of these years as a writer, or maybe as a teacher writer, which a lot of people do, or maybe as a freelance writer, and all of it kind of being more familiar. Like, whereas like I ended up in the interim years, I worked in advertising. I worked as a wedding planner. I owned that business, so I like had that experience. I worked as a consultant. I worked in nonprofits. Like I worked in higher ed, like in public colleges. So like I had so many experiences and met so many different people. I did reality TV, which was like a trip, but only because I was doing those other things. So I think, I don't know. I mean, I think, I probably would have like a whole bookshelf of my books maybe, but I don't know that they'd be as interesting as I think this is, and what I know my next project is. Go Hawkeyes.
I love that answer. Yeah, and I just wholeheartedly agree. I mean, there's so much. I mean, a lot of what people say about this book is it's very wise. There's a lot of wisdom in this book, and it's just so seasoned. And I think that it just shows you've lived, and what you've seen and learned about life is in this work. Just a couple other questions about your story before we actually get onto the book, which is so great. But I mean, I don't know, your story is also great. Everything about you is great. So I don't know where to begin. When I saw you at Brown in 2019 for our reunion, at that point you were like, oh, well, I think at that point, if I'm remembering correctly, you're like, well, I've got a couple hundred pages of the book written, or, I'd started writing the book, but then you already had an agent, and your agent, if I may, is like this amazing agent, Molly Glick with CAA. Molly Glick is just sort of a legend. And so I guess my question just there specifically is like, well, the advice you always hear about writing is, well, you can't even approach an agent if you're an unpublished author unless you have a completed, for fiction anyway, unless you have a completed manuscript. But somehow you got this agent. And not only that, I know that, you said in your acknowledgments that, Molly sort of had a vision for your career that she believed in even before you did. So I'm just kind of like, how did you find Molly, and like, what's that vision that she had so early on? What did she see?
Well, it's so interesting. So actually, to your point about writing, I did fetishize books. Does that make sense? I, as a younger person who couldn't see a path from here to there, I think I would get very jealous of people that, classmates of ours or whatever, people we knew. That it's like, how do you make a book? Like, how do you get? I really didn't understand the path. And then later, when I had that wedding blog, I had a client that worked in publishing, and she was like, you should really write a memoir about your time as a wedding planner. And I was like, that's interesting. And she was like, there's an agent that you should meet. And so it was Molly, and we talked on the phone, but we spoke on the phone, and then I did a proposal for her. And this is probably in 2011 or 2012. And she was at the Foundry at that time, but she was like, look, your writing is amazing. Like, because, nonfiction, you have to write like a sample chapter, and then what can happen. It's a little different than a novel. And I really, that was like, I actually even forget that I did that project, like that process of like thinking through that, but like I did. And she was like, look, this is great. She's like, but I'm not going to be able to sell this. She's like, it's too dark. Like, the world can't deal with a dark story about a wedding planner. Fast forward 10 years, the world seems to be able to deal with it, but I mean, in a totally different form. But and then what ended up happening, very coincidentally, everything about this book is also very kismety. I won the Disquiet Prize, and I'd gotten into Iowa, and my friend Elena, the one that told me I should write, used to twist my arm into taking these horrible exercise classes with her. And I hated them. Like I would go like cause it was like our bonding thing together, but I really was miserable there. And we were talking in the locker room and Molly was there and she knew Molly from publishing. And so she was like, oh, you guys have to meet. She just got into Iowa, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, well, we should connect. And because her name is spelled unusually, like it ends like in an IE instead of a Y, and my name is what my name is. And we didn't know, even when she introduced us, that it was the same until we saw our names. Like, and it was like a first name and a Molly, and like, okay. Like, and then she was like, oh my God, you were that person.
Yeah.
And so I think she was already familiar enough with the fact that I could write and construct like a book. And then I sent her the first 100 pages. And I remember when I officially signed, and she was just like, well, I can see your next 5 books. Like I can see them in front of me. And she just was, and I mean, she just had this, she was like, you have more ideas and you like, and she's like, and you can write nonfiction and fiction and, and they're deep books. And so she really believed in me. And I definitely, and as soon as people are always like, how did you sell the film rights before the book was even out? Like, how is the pilot concurrent with the book? Almost was everybody's big thing. And she so believed in it that she had it teed up with her colleague, my book to film agent, Dana at CAA, already, so that film scouts were getting it before the auction even happened. So, she just was so like, cool. This is so good. And so, but I think sometimes what happens is, I mean, this is just another nuts and bolts thing. Sometimes I think, especially in the, I don't know, whenever we have all these stupid categories, like a contemporary fiction space or the like literary fiction space. And I think there's this thing about like, well, I only want to be at this agency, or I only want to be at that agency. And that CAA is so commercial. And like the other part was I went to Iowa thinking, well, maybe I'll have to get another day job, but I wrote half this novel with a day job. That'll be okay. Maybe I can do something in publishing. That would be productive and cool and interesting. But Molly thought there might be a different path. And so, and I say that to say, I was not going to be embarrassed about being at a big agency. Like, like, I was like, no, I was like, I think that but I meet a lot of people that are like, well, I only want to be with this agent because they represent these 5 other very literary writers. And I was not that person. Like, I was like, and the reason why this happened was because CAA is into both businesses. So from the very beginning, they were like, we can, versus bringing somebody in after the fact and sort of, and which is what happens a lot of the time. So it was very holistic. And sort of was like, this is a big picture thing that we can do here. And and because of the content of the book, I felt that there were some original things about it that were very important to me and my heart that I wanted to have out in the world in the biggest way possible. Yeah. And that was part of the appeal of also doing the TV adaptation. Totally.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to get into that in a minute. But like one more question about your story before we get into all that. And by the way, I mean, you're saying I didn't, some people just only want certain agents or like, you landed with like so many people's dream agent, I think.
I know.
Molly is just
she's
a legend.
Amazing. She's amazing. I know. Yeah. It's so funny, but it's like she was a legend at Foundry, and then you go to CAA, and it's like, and suddenly it's like CAA, like, and I really mean that in the very MFA Iowa.
Yes.
I don't want to blame Iowa, but like it's in that very like
snobby kind of like commercial is bad.
Commercial is bad. Like I need to be at this boutique, tiny literary agency. But the other thing that people have to think about also is like, I don't know, like who are the people reading your work also at some of these places, and are there like what is their taste sort of like defined? Sure. Well, is it only defined by that? And what Molly also really and I had in common with my editor is like, my favorite Iowa alumnus besides Sandra Cisneros is probably John Irving. Like, I'm not afraid of. I like commercial writers. Like there are writers that I really like. Like so.
All right. So just one last thing about your story. So again, you kind of took an interesting path to Iowa. You're somebody who's kind of, you had so much kind of life experience and so on, but like not so much writing experience, but you did have a little writer group at the time. And you certainly knew some people in publishing, I guess. So part of the question that comes to mind with that is like, well, why did you think you needed to go to Iowa? And you sort of already answered that earlier, but I guess the question I really want an answer to is, having gone to Iowa, what was it like looking back now that you think you got there that was just indispensable? What was, like, if you could just say like maybe one thing?
Time.
Go on.
Leisure of time. You know, my plan, I did feel that the craft work at Red Loaf made me think that an MFA could be very helpful, you know, in having readers, but also teachers, like, and actually like breaking things down. And so I was committed to doing that. My original plan was to do it in New York and not blow up my entire life and give up my rent stabilized apartment. But in hindsight, what a dumb idea. And that I realized in Iowa, because I would have needed my regular day job plus school class time, plus teaching, because you probably would have had a teaching requirement, and then time to read your classmates' work and time to write your own work. Right. And so what I got in Iowa more than anything else was time. Like it was more like a residency. Like it was really like, for the first time since I did study abroad in 1997, I didn't have a job. All I did was go to school, because you couldn't, because you're doing study abroad. Like, and like literally all I did was go to school, and I got like, they deposited a little amount of money in my bank account that was enough to live on in Iowa. And other than Tuesday evenings, like almost all my time and the time to read for Tuesday evenings for workshop, almost all my time was just around this ability to like sink in. And then that allowed me to understand how I like to write, right? Like, it's like, I kind of like to go off the grid. I'm pretty fast. I like to go off the grid and just stay stay for hours, versus, you know, some people are like, I'm going to do this for like this much amount of time a day, and then I do X, Y, and Z things. And I'm more like an obsessive, like, right. So like the hope is next month I disappear sort of and just be obsessive and disgusting and in my pajamas. Yeah.
All right. So we just had a question pop up again, which is like totally apropos and the perfect segue to what I wanted to ask you next, which is just, we're almost, you know, I've got about 15, 20 minutes left here, but I wanted to get into the actual book, which is so terrific. So one of the things is, so Deborah Cantor, thank you for this question, is asking what was going to be my next question, which is about the title of the book. And so I must admit, I had not heard of this poem, Puerto Rican Obituary, until I read this book. And I read that poem over the weekend, and it just totally blew me away. And I listened. Oh my God, I listened to an audio recording of the poet reading it, and we're going to put a link to that in the chat. So please check out this poem. It just blew my absolute friggin' socks off. So I guess the question from Deborah, and also just my question too, is just a little bit about, you know, why did you want to kind of bring your title from that poem? How did you first come across that poem?
Yeah. So the good part about the time when I was in college was like, it was kind of a moment where there was a bit of a burst of Latino authors and some attention on that. I think In the Time of Butterflies had come out then, Julia Alvarez's book. And I think When I Was Puerto Rican came out then, and I remember eating that stuff up. And, you know, House of Manuscript had been a little bit predecessor, but Women in Hollering Creek, there were a bunch of books kind of coming out, and poetry. Like a lot of specifically Puerto Rican poetry, because of the New Rican Poets Cafe. Yeah. And so being in New York, like that was very much on my radar. But like I have Aloud, which is the reader that got published when I was in college, which is all giant. It's all old Paul Beatty poems, which are amazing. But like anyway, just giant anthology.
I love Paul Beatty.
And, yeah, he's amazing. And so I should just say like that he was part of the New Rican Poets movement. So that was always kind of on my radar. My parents had been like activists, so that sort of activist poetry had always been on my radar. I don't know exactly when I first encountered it. What I will say is that I forgot about it. I actually completely forgot about it. And then I was looking to find old Balante newspapers, which is the paper for the Young Lords. I stumbled in looking for that, for this Hooray for the Riff Raff music video that Chris Mercado directed, and Alinda Segata is like the main person in that goes by Hooray for the Riff Raff. And in the middle of the song, she puts in part of the audio recording, and it's Juan Miguel Olga Manuel, and it's All Die Dreaming, and Juan dreams of, you know, winning the lottery, and it goes on and on. And so I had already picked her name as Olga, and I named her after Olga Garriga, which is in the book. Like, I looked through revolutionaries, and I was like, that's great. Like, and then I knew I wanted to take the title from there because I wanted to create, I think because there hasn't been systemic builds on our artistic movements, like it's like there was this burst in the 90s, and then it's sort of the attention, not the artwork didn't peter out, but the attention to the artwork peters out. The commercial backing behind it peters out. And so a lot of these things get lost and forgotten. Like, the attention around, there's so many reasons why gentrification, like, there's so many things, the lack of popularity of slam poetry suddenly because it doesn't have a cable show, all these things that happen. And it's like very, you lose things. And so I really wanted to kind of build the bridge. He was to not just the kind of era of the Young Lords, which is when he wrote that poem, but also just artistically about the creation of poetry, literature, words amongst Puerto Rican people.
Yeah. And that's another part of the book that I really wanted to discuss. The mother character, Blanca, in this book, she was probably my favorite character. It's so interesting what you do with her because she's the mother of Olga and her brother, but she has abandoned the family at a young age to go be a political activist and essentially a kind of fugitive, somebody who kind of believes in fighting for rights of politically oppressed people, and she's an idealist. But she's not really in the book. She does come into the book at some point. I don't want to give too much away, but largely she appears in these interstitials. She's writing letters to Olga and her brother, and she gets some of the best lines of the book. I mean, she has this one line that's so great, and I've seen other people quote it online about how, people can begin as your sail and later become your anchor. There's another beautiful line. She's talking about her husband, Olga's father, and saying, when he lost his dreams, he lost his discipline. I mean, I thought that was, I've never quite heard it said like that, the kind of the relationship between having strong dreams and having strong discipline. But she exerts this outsized influence over Olga's life and her sense of who she is and what success means. And Olga's here trying to kind of live a kind of American dream, chasing kind of a financial, kind of the money and the fame in a sense, just trying to make a career, while as like her mother is this idealistic person fighting for Puerto Rican nationalism and so on. And I'm sorry to spill over with a long question, but I mean, she really got to me, and she was so convincingly and passionately written. And I guess just the question is, who is this character? And, why does she come across so alive in that way?
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. She was loosely inspired originally by my own mother, who had been an activist with the Socialist Worker Party, and is sort of a very black and white type of person. And then I was watching a bunch of documentaries. So like some was about Nina Simone's daughter, and just this, I realized that there's a bit of a pathology between the type of parent, like activist parents, like where they're wonderful activists and maybe not the best parents. And then I read about Filiberto Ojeda Rios and how he left his kids for like when he ran into the mountains. I never thought about him as a father. Does that make sense? Like it's like I knew of his existence, but then I was like, how weird that. And he would send them like cassette tapes, like of his voice, And the voice itself. In my research, I read this fabulous book, which is called Through the Eyes of Rebel Women. And it was it was a mix of women's writing for the Palante paper. It was all women of the Young Lords. And then I combined with just sort of accounts of their experiences. And I realized that there was a certain cadence and way of talking and thinking about words that were of that, the sort of milieu when they were coming of age that they keep using. And so it became somewhat easy to find her voice, but the point was really like, who is that uncompromising person that sees things kind of only as black and white, and also what's that worldview? And I think, a funny thing, I feel like I went to a high school that was very theater heavy. I took a lot of acting classes. My teacher, Scott Martin, is like, he's still wonderful and cheering me on. And the first thing that he tells you is that no villain thinks of themselves as a villain. And that's such a great thing to keep in mind when you're writing, because some people, she's such a Rorschach test. Some people are like, she's a terrible mother. And it's like, but like there's other things about her. So she's never fully right. She's never fully wrong.
Right.
And I think that was important. Like sometimes she says she's mean and the things
Yeah.
that she says, but other times the truth is the truth is very true.
Yeah. She's extremely complicated. She's not always sympathetic, but she's just incredibly driven. And I think, one of the great things that it does is bring up another big set of issues in the book, which is the way that Olga just feels so torn up about what is a meaningful kind of life. Who am I and who am I trying to impress? And I mean, I think there's just this tension that's in this work between, hey, am I here in America to live the so-called American dream, which is to get on a reality TV show and become like a celebrity wedding planner? That seems like something that, the Kardashians would approve of or something, right? Versus this very pure and kind of anti-materialistic, anti-USA heritage that she comes from, and just this being torn not only between materialism and non-materialism, but also being torn as kind of a newcomer to this country, being torn between, do I embrace my new country or do I honor my heritage, and can you do both? And I just thought the way that Olga is torn up between these two things was so well done.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I mean, I think that the thought is really like, the largest thought behind it was like, I was really fascinated by the fact that like my parents, my dad's family is Mexican American, but from the border. And so like really nobody, my mom grew up in Brooklyn. Like she said, it was her family, it was her parents like that. But it's all to just say, nobody became American by choice in either side of this family. So I mean, there's many things that we need to do better, but it's not like I'm unpatriotic or I hate America. Like that's not.
No. Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest that either.
The point being was more like, I think that said, like, it's more of what did you lose that you didn't intend to lose? And what Blanca and Johnny had been trying to do was to say, like, I'm not embracing these things that tell us that we shouldn't be speaking Spanish, that we shouldn't, like, we need to be lightening our skin, that we need to be dyeing our hair. Like, I don't want to embrace these things. And then I was fascinated by that, not just them, but that generation, like all of the Black Panther movement, all of the people that fought in, the later civil rights, the civil rights era and the later civil rights era that then begat sort of the shiny suit Puff Daddy era. And like I'm being myself and being one of them, where it's like somehow that the next generation was like, thank you for opening the door, and I'm going to use it to get into the Gucci store. Like, and I think that what I wanted to do is like, be like, okay, so now I have the Manolos and I have all the things that I was told on Sex and the City I'm supposed to be like accumulating, and I'm eating at Balthazar and I'm doing all the things. And then at the end of 10 years, you fast forward 10, 15 years, time goes so fast too, right? It's like, and you're like, what is this all for? Like, that Talking Head song, like, how did I get here? Like,
totally. Yeah. And I just thought, sometimes, I love when you can tell with a writer where the heat is, and you can tell, what activates a writer and activates their imagination and their passion. And when you start exploring this crevice of kind of like, who am I really trying to be here, and why am I trying to be this way? The art is just so rich in those moments, and some of my favorite parts of the book. Before we run out of time, I wanted to talk about the reception to the work. I mean, this book. I mean, I sort of like knew. Just when I heard you were writing a book like Molly, not that I'm some visionary like Molly Glick, but like when you told me you were writing the book and you kind of even told me about it in 2019, I was like, I bet this thing is going to be a hit. And and sure enough, it was a hit. And it's a huge hit now. It's being developed by Hulu. There's already a pilot, and so on and so forth. But I guess my specific question to you is just sort of, how has it been to see your book received this way? And is there something in particular that like really resonated you or touched you about the way the book has been received?
Oh, absolutely. Honestly, getting messages from Puerto Rican readers, New Rican readers, especially. Somebody DM'd me, like, they're like, you're never going to see this, but like, I grew up in Sunset Park, and, and just so many women, Latino women in general, but especially like Boricuas, New Rican women that are like, I've never seen myself this way. like, and this is the, like, I've seen this flattened version of myself. And so that has been the most meaningful. And now, so it's funny because there've been enough, it was book of the month. So it's been out there for a little bit. I'm seeing people have more, like, I think people like within the community, there's a little bit of like, I feel like we're afraid to say what things we think are weird about the book or whatever. But now I'm seeing people starting to have those conversations, and that's beautiful also. But this moment of being seen, even if it's an imperfect reception, that has been really, really empowering to me. And then weirdly enough, like I've gotten lots of messages from like Russian Americans and Polish Americans who are like, thank you for putting us in this book. Like, and I know, and I also would say that, and I've been really embraced by the Caribbean literary community, which I really love. And I think it's so beautiful to fully, I think sometimes there'd been like this thought of a divide of like, sort of the Spanish Caribbean and the sort of British Caribbean and French Caribbean. And it's just the way that this book has been embraced, because it is attempting to have an important conversation internally, if you're attuned to these things, about colorism and racism within our own communities. And color privilege, which is a big part of the book. And I think so I would say those three communities, it's just been really, I wrote it, I would say that's who I wrote it in mind. And so when your intention for your art is pushed past, that really is important. Obviously, I wrote it for Brooklyn. I mean, when I say I heard from some Eastern Europeans, they're all from Brooklyn. Like they're literally like, I'm on the N train right now, and I had to like, so, no, I mean, I think like I don't know that it would be hard to inauthentically write about Brooklyn, because I've lived here, except for the time that I went to Brown, and when I was in Iowa, I've lived here my entire life. So it's like that. That's just how I see the world.
Yeah. It is a love letter to Brooklyn. And I think Olga says at one point, like, I bleed old Brooklyn. And like, there's so much real. I mean, if people want to read about like the real New York, this is from somebody who can tell that story. Look, so we're gonna go to questions from the audience in a second, but just one to kind of summarize a bunch of questions that I've gotten over social media and so on. We just have to ask, what is going on with the show?
We're waiting to hear. Like, we should probably publicly, there'll be an announcement in a couple of weeks. The pilot is absolutely beautiful. Aubrey Plaza, Jesse Williams, Ramon Rodriguez, Wanda De Jesus plays Blanca. Awesome. Jessica Pimentel plays Mabel. I mean, really, really a beautiful, the art direction is just beautiful. The cinematography, all of it. It is it's film level, like everything about it. Alfonso Gomez Rejon, who did Me and Earl and the Dying Girl and Hunters and The Current War. I mean, his stuff is just so gorgeous. He's the executive producer and director of the pilot. So it's beautiful. And we're just going to see, but like the book, it doesn't pander to it. It doesn't like take a moment to explain anything. So, let's see. I hope that Hulu's been very supportive to this point, but we'll just have to find out what happens.
Oh my God. I mean, I don't see how good things could not happen. It just seems like every day more and more momentum. Like your Twitter feed is crazy. It's like every day, like some bigger celebrity is like, I also loved this book. It's just snowballing right now. It's so cool. All right. Do we have any questions from the audience that we could just throw up there? We've had a lot of people. Okay, here we go. Super curious what you're currently reading and what is next for you. I assume what is next means like, what are you going to write next? But
I mean, okay. What am I currently reading? I literally just today started, and now I'm not going to remember the name of the book, so I shouldn't talk about it. Never mind. It's a famous book that I'd never gotten to, and it's like Where It's Her Name, 1982. I'm trying to remember her name. Anyway, I just started it because somebody on my Instagram said that they were going to read it, and I was like, I've been wanting to read that. What I should be reading is actually a book about Santeria, which is research for my next novel. And then what am I writing next? It's a strange story that I'm excited about that braids a campus novel into a fictional retelling of the story of Ana Mendieta and Carl Andre and her murder. And so it's
in a nutshell, sorry, what is that story?
Ana Mendieta was a Cuban-American artist who married a much older, successful, more, very established sculptor, minimalist sculptor. And she was very afraid of heights. And one day they were fighting in their apartment alone, and then she fell out the 30th floor window, and he was tried for murder 3 different times. It ended in a mistrial both times, and then finally a judge exonerated him, not a jury, and he had a giant show at Dia. So everybody just sort of looked the other way, and this happened in 1983, and her ghost is telling me she needs her story told. So for legal reasons, I'm fictionalizing it. I am very much, I'm interested in bringing her back to life. So it takes place in the 80s art scene and 90s campus. A mysterious Ivy League college. No, this time no. So it's sort of an art scene in Providence in the 90s and art scene in New York in the 80s. And it's a lot of fun.
Okay, having gone to an Ivy League college in the 90s, I'm here as a resource for you if you need to just talk to somebody about it. All right. So look, we have to wrap. We're out of time here, but I just want to say to everybody, please read this book. I mean, a lot of the comments that have been coming through it's not only people, Xochitl, like in my socials and on this chat right now saying like that they want to read the book. There is that, but it's like people commenting like, I've already read the book. I enjoyed the book. Like, I mean, this book is already kind of deep into the culture.
It's so wild. I mean, people have been like, somebody sent me a note. They were like, I woke up at 3 a.m. and I was like, I have to finish reading this book. And so it's been really wild on the other side. Yeah, it's been really wild. I mean, beautiful. Isn't that crazy? It's so beautiful. But
and there was this great thing the other day. LitHub, you wrote a piece for LitHub about kind of like how much you wanted to write about New York, and like it was only being in like kind of the empty cornfields of Iowa that like, New York really came back to you, and you felt this compulsion to kind of truly create New York. And then somebody wrote this like beautiful like poem.
Wasn't that amazing?
The poem was amazing. There's like you're responding in real time with a poem to your essay.
I think the closing line was like, I realized that to love something is to long for it, and you can't to long for something is to love it, because you can't long for something you don't love. And she took that into a poem, and it's a poem after me, which I just thought was so beautiful. I've always thought that was such a beautiful thing that they do in poetry, where the title, and then it's like for this person. So it was just the most beautiful thing. The poem was insanely beautiful. And one of the things that I think is so wonderful. Oh, thank you. And if you like novenas, it's on my website, but like if you Google the name of the story, I wrote a story called Paloma Negra. It's actually an essay. That was what got me into Iowa and what won the Disquiet Prize. And if you like novenas, you'll probably like Paloma Negra a lot. And I think novenas is my favorite chapter, to be honest. And a lot of people at Iowa told me to cut it out, because they were like, there's no other themes of religion and blah, blah, blah. And, and I love my readers, but like at Iowa, they were wonderful. But I'm really glad that I stuck to my gut instinct and didn't cut it. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. Well, look, I have a question that I ask everybody who comes on the show. And so this is it. So imagine you have the ideal reader for OLGA DIES DREAMing. They're reading this book and they're getting everything that you're writing. They're picking up what you're putting down, every reference, every emotion you're trying to evoke in the reader. They are receiving it just the way you dreamed in your wildest dreams it would be received. Now imagine that this ideal reader finishes the book is sitting there on their lap. So just describe for me in a phrase or even a word, if you can, what is the feeling that this reader has finishing your book?
That's so good. Resilience. Yeah. I was trying to see if I could replace it with a different word, but it's resilience.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
Resilience. And I think that whatever it is, like to be inspired by your own resilience, I
love that. I think that's totally spot on. And it reminds me, the New York Times in its review said something similar. They said, in many ways, this is a book about liberation in all its forms, and I think, being liberated and being resilient are closely related. But resilience, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Well, look, this is so amazing. Your story is amazing, the story of the book, but also your personal story. And I hope Molly is right in that there's like 5 books coming out right away. And I just had this feeling that like I'm gonna look back in 5 years on this interview and be like, oh yeah, I interviewed Xochitl way back when she was just Xochitl and she wasn't the Xochitl.
Oh my God.
But it just seems like your star is totally on the rise, and I couldn't be more psyched for you. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. It was so fun to talk to you, old friend. So beautiful.
Yes, and if I don't see you in person sooner, then I will catch you at the next reunion, I hope.
Yes.
Okay, folks, thank you so much for joining Thoughtful Bro this week. We'll be back next week with Lost in the Valley of Death, which is the next John Krakauer, if you like that kind of thing. So we'll see you then. Thanks again, Xochitl.
Thank you.